Welcome to episode 31 of the Mobile Classroom, the weekly video podcast where we demonstrate today's most popular technologies. I'm James Messer. In this episode, we're going to talk about encrypting your data. We do so much with our computers these days that's about personal and information that we should have private, and I thought it would be nice to go through some different concepts and ideas about how we can take this information that we're saving on our tax forms and our online banking and our personal information and saving it on our computer in a way that nobody else would be able to read it. We'll do all of that in this episode and much more. When we talk about encrypting information, there's so many different ways to do it. We'll talk about encrypting files, which means that we're taking an individual file that's on our hard drive or a memory stick or some other device, and we're going to encrypt it. We'll learn how to encrypt it using built-in encryption in our operating system. I'll also show you a way that you could take that file, encrypt it, send it over email, which is generally an unsecured channel, but still have that file end up on the other side and have somebody have an easy way to decrypt the file so that while it's in transit, nobody would be able to see what's going on. We're also going to learn how to encrypt files using something called a virtual drive. We're going to set up a section of the hard drive that's going to be just encrypted data, and anything we put into that virtual drive will always be encrypted. Some very nice technologies there. And I'm also going to talk about the concept of encrypting your entire computer. What if from the moment you started booting your computer up, every single thing on your computer, the operating system, the program files you used, and the data files was all completely encrypted? We'll talk about all of those technologies in this episode. The standard definition version of this podcast this week is absolutely free. We have videos that we do every third podcast that are for mobile members only, which means you only get a small sampling of the podcast if you're not a member. This week, however, you get to see the whole thing from beginning to end. If you're a mobile member, you even get a little bit more. You get to see the entire podcast in full HD resolution. If you are not a mobile member, none of our podcasts are available to you in HD. You can only watch them in SD, standard definition. So mobile members get a little bit extra. They get a few extra podcasts and they get everything in crystal clear HD, which is how I'm recording this right now. So the podcast looks crystal clear whenever you watch it. If you'd like to find out information about becoming a mobile member and supporting our podcast, you can learn more at themobileclassroom.com/members. There are a few different ways to encrypt files. Some methods are very complex. Some are relatively easy to implement. I've selected a few of them for this podcast so that we could learn different ways that we could use built-in capabilities of our operating system and some third-party utilities to be able to encrypt files. Before we get into the actual mechanics of how you do that, I thought I would show you what it would look like on a file before you would encrypt and after you would encrypt. And what I did was choose just a simple text file so that you would really understand what's going on behind the scenes. This is the preamble to the United States Constitution. I just cut it and pasted it into a single text file called US Constitution Preamble.txt. And what I did was use a hex editor that grabbed the file and showed me the way that that file looks on the hard drive. So if I was to look at the hard drive itself, you can see everything is stored in hexadecimal format, or I'm representing it in hexadecimal format, and the text is off to the right, and you can read it. If somebody was to go to my hard drive and they were to look at this file, they would be able to read this file without any type of problem. It is in the clear and in an unencrypted form. What I did was use one of the programs that we're going to use today to encrypt the file. And when I encrypted it, you can see that I've got this AES Crypt header at the top of the file now because that's the program that I use to encrypt it. But notice all of the text that normally I would be able to read, I can't read. It's gobbledygook. It's nonsense. If somebody was to get this file, they would not be able to see anything that was in there. You can't even sort of make out what it might have been. There's no possible way to know what this is. And if I did not make this US Constitution Preamble.txt.aes, you really would have no idea what was in here. I could call this abcde.txt. And at that point, it's really up to the person decrypting it to be able to take this out of this encrypted form into something that would be readable again. Many operating systems allow you to encrypt the data right on the hard drive using built-in capabilities of the operating system, and Windows is no exception there. You can encrypt with Windows XP and Windows Vista and Windows 7. There's some other Windows operating systems that will do that as well, but it's built into the OS. It's something that's inherently available to you. You may not have even realized that it's something that's available to you. If you're running the file allocation table disk formatting system on your hard drive, though, it won't work. You must be running the NT file system for this to be able to operate. NTFS provides us with a number of additional capabilities at a file level, and NTFS includes the ability to turn on this encryption methodology. There's some other nice capabilities of NTFS as well. So if you're running an older operating system or you've migrated from an older operating system, you may still be running the FAT or the FAT32 allocation table file system on your computer. You may want to consider converting that to NTFS, which is a relatively simple process, painless, doesn't take very long. As long as you're not needing to share your hard drive with another operating system, NTFS may be a good conversion to do for you. And if you have NTFS configured on your system for that file system, you'll see that one of the capabilities is to encrypt files. And that's using something called the Encrypting file system, or EFS. If you needed to look up more about how this works and the details about how this encryption methodology works, just Google Encrypting file system in Windows, and you'll be able to see all of it. Now, what's important about doing this encryption is that if you are encrypting files on your hard drive, you have to be sure if there is a hard drive crash and you're pulling things off backup, that you have backed up the certificates that are used to encrypt these files. This encryption methodology uses certificates to be able to encrypt this data. It uses a private certificate, a public certificate. It all happens behind the scenes in the Windows operating system. But if at any point you need to recover this data, you need to decrypt this data, you must have these private certificates saved off somewhere so that you can make that happen. They're automatically saved in the Windows operating system, and when you log on, they're automatically available to you. So you want to be sure that you have a backup of this if you're planning to encrypt anything on your system, and I'll show you how to do a backup of this as well. Before we start encrypting files, let's see what type of file system we're using on this computer. If you go to My Computer, you'll be able to see the local hard drive we happen to be using. And if I right mouse click, I can choose Properties. It's going to bring up the name of this disk if I have one allocated to it, and I don't in this case. It is the local disk, and you can see the file system is NTFS. If you're running a different file system, you'll see that file system loaded here. It may say FAT or FAT32 in this view, and then you'll know what file system it is. So NTFS is the one that we need to be able to do the encryption, so I think we're in good shape there. Now on the desktop, I have this file, the U.S. Constitution Preamble. Here's what it looks like in my notepad. It's just a text file that's here. If I wanted to look at this, I'm going to do this from the Explorer just so you can see it a little bit better from the desktop. Here is the file right here, and I'm going to make sure that you can see the exact file type of this by bringing up the details. Here's the U.S. Constitution Preamble. It's a 1K file. It's a text document, and you can see when it was last modified. If I right mouse click on the U.S. Constitution Preamble and choose Properties, you'll see that it is a text document. It opens with Notepad and all the things you would normally associate with this. Under the Attributes view, you can see that it's not set to read-only. It is not a hidden file, but there's this Advanced button. Let's press the Advanced button, and you can see one of the options is to compress the contents to save disk space. That's a nice little capability that you may want to consider using, but what we want to do is to actually encrypt the contents to secure data. And when I click OK and then click OK again, Windows recognizes that I've never encrypted any files on this computer before, and it says that I've chosen to encrypt a file that is not in an encrypted folder. The file can become decrypted when it is modified. Because files saved in encrypted folders are encrypted by default, it's recommended you encrypt the file and the parent folder. So one of the things that makes this easy is you can say, take my entire desktop, and anytime I save anything to the desktop, it's automatically encrypted, or anything I save to my Documents folder, or to my Music folder, or my Documents folder, always encrypted. Now in this case, I just want to encrypt the single file only, and I'm going to click OK. And one of the things that you'll see here is now it looks exactly the same. It's a text document. The U.S. Constitution Preamble is right here. And if I look at my properties, you can see in Advanced, it is set to encrypt the contents to secure the data, which is exactly what I want. Now that I see this data that's in here, I have this file that's encrypted, I can view it if I log in and it looks normal to me. But if somebody else was to log into this computer or look at the file on the hard drive of this computer, they would see that this file was just full of gobbledygook. It was full of encrypted data. And that's what we want to be able to do, is set all of these things that we're doing or that we want to protect in our computer so that you would only be able to get to it if you could log in to our view of the operating system. Now, if somebody did have the ability to log in to this computer, well, then they would also log into my account. They'd see all the files that are encrypted with my account, because that's what I'm doing to encrypt everything. I'm using my credentials to be able to make that happen. Now, I mentioned earlier, if you want to be able to make sure that if this hard drive crashes and you're restoring from backup, that you have the certificates that were used to actually encrypt this file. So what we're going to do is go down to the Start menu, and I'm going to click Run. And one of the things I'm going to run is right here, this certmgr.msc. And if I click OK, it brings up this certificates manager. This isn't something you normally see in Windows. This is something that's usually hidden away. There's not an icon that starts up the certificates manager, for instance. The certificates for this encrypted file system are stored in this personal folder. You can see there's a lot of different logical store folders on here. I'm going to double click personal and then double click certificates. And I can see right here is this user document that the intended purposes for it is the encrypting file system. And you can see information about the certificate itself. In fact, if I wanted to look at the properties of this certificate, you can see exactly the way this is used. You can even give it a different name, a friendly name, we say, so that we can really view what this does. And you can see this is used for our encrypting file system. If you need to back this up, you want to back this up, and you should back this up, under the Action menu, under All Tasks, there's an option here to export this particular certificate. It brings up an export wizard that says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to export it. The private keys are password protected. Now, the private key is really what's used in conjunction with a public key to create this encryption. If we're really backing this up, we need to back up absolutely the private key. So with the certificate, make sure you're exporting the private key as well. One thing to keep in mind, your private key decrypts everything along with this entire certificate. So you want to be sure, if you're storing this somewhere, that you're storing it somewhere very safe that nobody else would be able to get their hands on. When we're decrypting this information, we never put in a password. It just uses our Windows credentials for this to happen. But if we are exporting this file and sending it out, you'll see that it always requests a password for this. That way, if somebody did manage to get their hands on your certificate and the private key, it would be something that they'd have to have the password for the private key to be able to then have access to it. So another level of security right on top of that. If you're exporting it off, that's something that's nice to have. So you must put a password in here. It requires that you do that and that the password match. And I'm going to click Next. It says, where do you want to put this file? And I'm going to put it right in my desktop, and I'm going to call it my EFS cert. And I'm going to click Save and Next. And it says, here's what we've chosen. Does that sound good? Yes, it does. And the export was successful. So now we know that we look out here, there's my EFS cert right there. It is my information. I'm going to look at the properties of this. Yep, this is exactly what I'd like. This is my personal information exchange certificate. And now I can take that certificate, save it off somewhere else, and know that if I ever lose this hard drive and I need to restore from a backup, I'll still have access to all of those encrypted files. Encrypting files at the operating system level is great because I can store things on this hard drive, and if somebody manages to get a hold of my computer or this hard drive, they would not be able to see that file unless they were able to log in as me. This doesn't allow us, though, to change the contents of the file when we're sending it to someone else. Once we're outside the operating system, the file's not encrypted any longer. If I wanted to put this in an email and to send it to somebody, I would not be able to do that because it's not encrypted any longer. Fortunately, there's this great third-party program. It's very simple to use. It's absolutely free and allows us to do exactly that, to encrypt the file and send it across perhaps in an unsecure form to the other side, but the contents of that file would still be secure. It's something called AES Crypt. You can find it at aescrypt.com, and it's extremely simple in the way that it takes a file and stores it as an encrypted form that you can then share with other people. What's also nice about this particular program is it works across multiple operating systems. So if somebody's running Mac OS X, they're running Linux, they're running a version of Windows that's older or newer, you don't have to worry about it. There's a version of AES Crypt that will work on any of those operating systems. And it's very simple. I don't have to worry about certificates and public keys and private keys and sharing things. It's nothing that I have to integrate into my particular mail program. This is all done in this external program. And by using just the shared passphrase, it makes it very, very easy for you to take a file, make it into something very secret, and you can send it off in an unsecure form. I can send it off an email, which is very unsecure, all the way to the other side. And as long as the person on the other side has the same passphrase, the file will always be able to be decrypted and they can view it normally. And let's try this out. Let's install AES Crypt and see how this works. Here's the AES Crypt website. It's at aescrypt.com, and you can see there's Windows and Linux and Mac and Java. You don't even have to run one of those other operating systems as long as you can run Java to do your encryption and your decryption. There's a lot of great information on this website about how AES Crypt works under the surface and what you can do with it. What we're going to do is go to our download section, and I'm going to choose the AES Crypt executable. I'm running a Windows 32-bit version. Notice there's also console versions and Mac and Linux and command line versions in here as well. We're going to download this file, and once it downloads, I'll unzip the file and we'll run the setup for the program. Here's my download of AES Crypt. It downloads as a compressed file, so I'm going to use right mouse click and use the extract all function in here to extract this archive and just put it into a folder that's right here in my downloads folder. It extracts all of the files that are in there and it creates a folder for me just for AES Crypt. And here it is. Inside of that is another folder, and then finally the files that I'll need to set up the program. You can see there's a setup program that will double click and run. It says, do you want to run the software? I absolutely do. And it says that I need different components. Do I wish to install these components? It uses the Visual C++ runtime libraries. On your computer, if it's one that you use a lot, you may already have these runtime libraries there. If you don't, the setup program goes out to Microsoft, grabs those libraries, installs them, and now it goes through the process of putting both the libraries on here that it needs to be able to run, and it also begins doing the installation of the AES Crypt program itself. We're going to go through the installer for AES Crypt and click Next. Where would you like to put it? Under Program Files, AES Crypt. That sounds good. And it's going to put it on our computer. We click Next, and it goes through the process. So the installation itself is relatively simple. It doesn't require you to reboot anything. You click Next a bunch of times, and it's installed. From that point on, it's embedded and integrated into your Explorer, which makes it very, very easy now to encrypt and decrypt files. Now that we've finished installing it, I'll click Close, and now we're done. We're back to where we were with the very beginning of this. I'm going to go back to my desktop and show you how this works. We now have this U.S. Constitution preamble file here that as you look at it, you can see it is something that is not encrypted because we are logged in, and although it's encrypted on the hard drive, when we use it in the operating system, we see that it's something that is not encrypted. If you right mouse click now, one of the options here is AES Encrypt, and it simply asks, what password do you want to allocate to this? And you can put in a password for this file and click OK. And then it creates a separate file for you, which is the U.S. Constitution preamble.txt. It actually has a .aes at the end of it. In fact, let's look at that. I'm going to go to my folder options just so you can see this under view. And I'm going to choose in here to show the extensions for known file types. I'll uncheck the hide extensions option and click OK just so you can see at the end of this. The U.S. Constitution preamble.txt is here. When I created that new one, it created a new copy of the file. The idea here is that you would be taking this file and sharing it with someone else. This is not something that's integrated into your operating system. The idea is that you want to share this file with somebody else. Let's say on the other side now, you've received the file, you've got that U.S. Constitution preamble.txt.aes. I removed the preamble program or the file from my hard drive here so that we could do this. If I right mouse click, there's an option now to AES Decrypt. So on the other side, the person you're sending this to would need to install the AES Encrypt program, but once they have it, they'd have to know the passphrase. If they put in the wrong passphrase, it says, sorry, you can't, the message has been altered or the password is incorrect. So something is not quite right with that, and that's not going to work. But if we do have the right passphrase, we'll type in what I think is the right one. It now unencrypts, it decrypts that file, and now it's back on this hard drive. And if I double click the file, there it is. Now we see the file exactly the way it was. So that's the idea of being able to take this, something that was encrypted before, and be able to simply send it across in perhaps an unsecure mode to the other side. As long as you both know the secret word on both sides, you'll be able to decrypt this program and have access to it. So far, we've looked at encrypting files. We've used the operating system to encrypt files, but we had to turn that on and make sure that the folder or the file that we had selected had been encrypted. We also used this external program, AES Crypt, AES Encrypt, to encrypt and decrypt these files. But that was something we also had to manually say, yes, I would like to encrypt or decrypt this file. What we can do now, let's to the next level, is to create a virtual drive on our computer where anytime we save information to that drive, it's encrypted. Anytime we pull information off the drive, it's automatically decrypted. It's something that's now built into the operating system and works automatically. You don't even have to think about it. We use a great little program to do this called Truecrypt. This is another free program that is incredibly powerful at being able to encrypt entire sections of your drive by creating a virtual drive that everything is stored in. You can find this at truecrypt.org. And not only does this allow you to create this virtual drive that you can put in and out of your computer, both virtually and physically, if you want to do it on a removable drive, you can also do things like create hidden volumes, even hidden operating systems on your computer, so that if somebody was to access your computer, they might get a Windows XP machine or desktop to start up. But only if you know the secret method of getting in and starting up the hidden operating system do you get to your real and true actual OS. So this is something that really is a little bit cloak and dagger in the way that it works, but extremely functional at both hiding information and making sure that all of your data that's stored on your computer is absolutely safe and private because you've encrypted everything. If you've never used or seen Truecrypt before, I highly recommend that you read through a lot of the details on the Truecrypt website. It is a very well written website that goes into a lot of interesting details about how all of these things work. The main page here talks about the main features of creating that virtual encrypted disk, encrypting an entire partition or storage device, the entire drive itself, or maybe encrypting a partition or drive where Windows is installed so that you can't access anything but what we'd like to. Notice that it's automatic, it's on the fly. And with all of these things, you can start selecting how this works. The documentation part of the website goes into a lot of details of exactly the way this operates. And if you're trying to figure out, what do you mean a hidden volume and how does that work? And what is the method that it uses to do this? We'll go through some of that in here. You'll see how it works. Although the mechanics behind it, the cryptography behind this is extremely complex, Truecrypt does a really good job at presenting us with a screen that's very, very easy to use. You don't really have to know how it works on the back side of this. Since it's all integrated into your normal operation of the operating system, you can just turn it on and forget that it's even there. Let's install Truecrypt and see just how easy this is. I've downloaded the Truecrypt setup program for my operating system. I'll double click to run it. It downloads as an executable. So when you try to run it, it says that this is an application we don't know about. Are you sure you would like to run it? I would. Here is the licensing agreement for the Truecrypt. If you agree to everything in the licensing, you can click the accept and click accept. And notice you can do things like install the program or just extract the files from this and then run it in what we call a portable mode. And we've done that in previous podcasts using a USB drive where all of our programs just run portably. I'm going to install it on my hard drive, however. The installation puts it in Program Files Truecrypt, and you can install it for all users on this computer, add it to the Start menu, an icon to the desktop, take the TC files, which are those virtual sections that we're going to set up on our computer, associate those with Truecrypt, and create a system restore point. That all sounds good with me. So now that it creates the restore point, we're able to now go back in time prior to installing Truecrypt. If there's something about it we don't like or we'd like to be sure we can remove it from our computer, that's a great way to do it. It's loading up drivers. It's really integrating into the operating system, so that's not a bad idea. Truecrypt has been successfully installed, and we'll click OK. It says if you've never used Truecrypt before, you may want to look at the beginner's tutorial in the user guide. So it takes you right away to the Truecrypt website and talks about how to do these things by creating volumes, creating containers, and being able to use it that way. And as I mentioned, it's a great resource on the website. If you haven't used it before, you may want to read through that just a little bit. I'm going to click Finish, and you can see that we now have an icon on our desktop called Truecrypt. Let's start it up. By itself, as we start up, unless somebody has given us an encrypted section, a little container that has encrypted data in it, or that we've had one on our computer before, we don't have anything right now. So what I'd like to do is create a volume. I'm going to click that, and it says, great, let's create either an encrypted file container. I would like to encrypt an entire non-system partition or drive. Maybe we've built out a new partition on our computer, or we have a flash drive, and we would just like to encrypt that entire drive that's on there. That may be a good idea as well. Or you can take the entire system partition or the entire system drive and encrypt that as well. Now, obviously, that's a much bigger deal, and you want to be sure you know exactly what you're doing there, because if you run into problems later on and you lose part of the drive or you want to restore from backup, you're going to need some very specific recovery tools to be able to start this up again and have the correct bootloader loading up so that it can decrypt the data as it goes. We're going to start with just an encrypted file container. I'm going to click Next, and we can either do a standard Truecrypt volume, or we can do something called a hidden Truecrypt volume. I love this idea. This is if the information you have on here is very private, but somebody's roughing you up to get your secret passphrase. You can give them a passphrase that opens up what appears to be a standard Truecrypt volume. But what you've really created with the hidden volume is a volume within a volume. You've got a normal Truecrypt volume, and you've created another one inside of that. And they can't see that. They don't know what it is. It looks like to them that they finally got into your data. But the reality is there's a hidden wall. There's a bookshelf you'll have to move to get through to the other side, and nobody knows it's there but you. So really nice capabilities built into Truecrypt to be able to do that. There's some really nice explanations on their website about how that works. What I'm going to do is just create a standard Truecrypt volume so you can see how this works. And I can either select a file or I can specify. I'm going to put mine right here on the desktop so that we can see it. And on the desktop, I'm going to call this file name our mobile classroom Truecrypt volume. I don't want to save history here. We're going to be very private and secret about it. I'm going to click Next. And then it says, what encryption algorithm do you want to use? We've got a number of different kinds. AES, we've already seen that AES encryption used with the program that we were just using on our AES Encrypt and Decrypt, or you can use some of these other encryption algorithms in here. AES is pretty well established at this point, although you do have the ability to combine different encryption methods. Encrypt with this, then encrypt with another, and then encrypt with another. In our case, let's do something simple. We'll just use AES, which in itself is extremely effective. It has not gotten any backdoors. Nobody's really found a way to break into AES. So most of the industry feels really comfortable with that particular encryption algorithm. Let's click Next. It says, how big do you want this volume to be? So we're essentially creating a drive we're going to store files in. For the purposes of what we're doing, I've got a lot of free space on my drive, but I'm just going to choose a 10 megabyte file size volume for this. That looks good. Let's click Next, and it says, what password would you like to associate with this volume? Again, this passphrase is very important for what you're doing. You've also got the option to use key files inside of this that you would create separate files, and you must have the file to be able to get into this particular volume along with the password. We're going to keep this very simple right now. I'm just going to use the password. It says, I've got a short password here. It's very easy to break this by just trying every possible different iteration of letters and numbers. And it says, we recommend you create a password of more than 20 characters. Are you sure you want to use a short password? Or for the purposes of this podcast, yes, that's fine. That's exactly what we'll do. You may want to make yours a little bit higher. Now, at this point, it says we want to move our mouse randomly around the screen so that the encryption key becomes very, very randomized in how it's determining to create the final header key and master keys and the things that it needs to be able to encrypt. So the idea is that nobody else would be able to move their mouse around to the exact point on their screen every time. And so the more you move it around, the better off that randomness is going to be. And we're going to say, that's good, I've got enough there. Now let's format that particular section of the drive. And now I've got a Truecrypt volume. That looks great. And click OK. And it says, yep, we're done. We're ready to go. And you can see down here, actually, it does have my mobile classroom Truecrypt volume right there. Well, I'm done creating volumes, so we can cancel out of this. Now we're ready to mount our mobile classroom volume that we've created. So I'm going to select a file, and this is in my desktop. I have this mobile classroom volume that I've created, and then I'm going to click Mount, and it says what password is associated with this volume. I'm going to put in the same password we used before. This is also where you might want to use your key file if that was one of the options you had there. And you've got a number of options here. Do I want it mounted as read-only? Is this a removable media? If there is other information about backup headers, mounting the partition using a system encryption without pre-boot authentication, a number of different options you might want to use depending on how you want to use the data. We're going to use the default options there with just the password. And now you can see I've got an M drive that is now available. If I go to my computer, you can see right here, I've got a local disk M that is completely empty. And now anything I put into this drive will be encrypted with Truecrypt. So if I want to take that preamble constitution and drop it right in there, now everything that's stored in there is encrypted and not available to anyone else. When I unmount this drive, this virtual volume that we've created, now the only way to get into it is both using Truecrypt and knowing the passphrase that I associated with that particular encrypted volume. If I wanted to take that encrypted volume and send it to someone else or store it outside of my computer, the only thing that I would need to be able to get to it is Truecrypt and the secret passphrase I've associated with it. So that makes it very, very easy now to have this portable encrypted volume everywhere I go. If I lose my flash drive, I don't have to worry about it. I know that nobody who gets that flash drive will be able to read anything that's on there or use any of the data. Very, very simple way to take entire sections of your drive, external drives, or perhaps the entire drive, and encrypt it and make it secure so that only you have access to that data. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Mobile Classroom on encrypting your data. We have many, many other previous podcasts that you can browse through that deal with other security topics, anti-spyware, anti-malware. We've got video and audio technologies that we look into, and many, many other topics. Every week we have something new for you. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can find us at twitter.com/mobileclassroom, or follow our Facebook page, which you can like from the mobileclassroom.com website, and that way you'll know instantly whenever we put something new out on the website. If you'd like to send me an email directly, you can always let me know at james@themobileclassroom.com. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you next time on the Mobile Classroom.